Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3817. Today's date is January 14, 2026. It's been almost like afternoon at 15:16 means it's been almost like a 03:16 p.m. Okay, yeah. It's very hard to explain. It's in line. It's like actually a recording afternoon. Okay, afternoon at 3 3:16, like like basically a military way to kind of like say this now. Okay, there are a couple of different way to kind of like tell your time. Okay, yeah, in military point of perspective is uh 1517 o'clock, or maybe like 1517, or maybe like 1517 probably. I'm not really sure. I haven't really been on army, but they kind of like simply talk like that way. Okay, like 0600, or maybe uh 1517. Okay, yeah, probably it's kind of like a some military way to kind of like a. And by the way, my mobile phone has a kind of like a 24-hour clock time. Okay, and I'm aware of that. Ki what is exactly 15 means like a 03. Okay, yeah, means afternoon at 03. Okay, because like AM PM is bit more confusing regarding about the similarity of, if you just change the letter, you just kind of like confuse the whole story regarding about it. So that's why I kind of like changed my clock from 24-hour, and it's been always been 24-hour clock. Okay, yeah. So I'm bit really aware of that, ki what is actually existing, but might be you not really aware of that. So maybe the 1517, that means a kind of like a something 0318. Right now it's 18, not 17. Like we've been actually talking for almost like a minute for this shit stuff. Whatever. Let's just jump into the question. All right. Yeah. Okay. The question is, what if emotion fuel innovation? Okay, that's a really good question. First of all, what exactly is this question, and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always been really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force me to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality, or when I try to create that reality inside of my mind, I'm kind of like utilizing my knowledge, information, and experience that I've been through, and somehow it kind of like a felt good. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right, or is not exactly wrong either. It's a raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I'm saying. It's just my opinion, and opinion are subjective. Now regarding about the question says that, what if emotion fuel innovation or invention? What exactly it means? It means that ki, the innovation around you kind of like a simply change according to your emotion. Very hard to explain, right? Yeah, it is. Imagine that ki, you came from office, you are very stressed, you are very tired, and things like that. Now suddenly your house is became kind of like a light mood. Okay, yeah, the lighting change according to the kind of like a simply giving you mellow and things like that. The surface of the walls and kind of like a, the floor and ceiling is kind of like a feel little bit of warmer, a kind of like a something that the wall is trying to hugging you, as well as the wall is kind of like a feel little bit softer. It's not kind of like a showing a kind of like a concrete kind of like a strong, it just kind of like a giving you jelly and things like that, but with softer touch and things like that. Okay, yeah. The smell is a kind of like is only giving you like a pleasant and things like that. Automatically music is kind of like a play with a kind of like a very peaceful and things, so that you just kind of like a, yeah. Then you kind of like a take off the shirt and pant, and then you kind of like a do a shower. And when you do the shower, the water came out from very exact temperature, not too hot, not too cold. It just very good. You just kind of like a do the shower, and you just kind of like sit there, ate your kind of like a some dinner or whatever it is. And yeah, so this is what kind of like a some innovation change according to innovation change, like a your infrastructure or your things that could change according to your emotions and things like that, right? Yeah. But will it be happen in real world? Well, it's not happening in real world. Like basically we have kind of like a couple of technology that today exist that kind of like simply understand the perspective of looking at it and kind of like a change according, like basically light is automatically changed according to mood. You have to press some sort of button or things like that. Yeah. The music change according to the mood. Yes, we have that thing, but we don't really have that kind of like the surface kind of like a feel warmer or kind of like a softer or things like that might. But it's not really that this technology is kind of like only so much like we cannot able to do this thing. Yeah, we can able to do this thing. It's not really that key possible. It is, yeah, but still it's a hypothetical scenario. Okay, yeah. So can we emotion are kind of like a change innovation? Like basically is this thing that if you wanted to innovate any kind of like some stuff, emotions are responsible for that or not? Well, I think somewhat somewhere is it, like I don't know how do I supposed to explain. Okay, yeah. So logic and emotion are two different thing and kind of like a somewhat something opposite to it. Okay, yeah. Sometimes logic and emotion are in the same direction, but sometimes logic and emotion are kind of like a completely opposite to each other. It also depend upon the situation, right? Example is this thing that ki, let's just say tomorrow is a Raksha Bandhan. Raksha Bandhan is a festival, by the way. Okay, yeah. Now, as a Raksha Bandhan, we have to kind of like exchange the gift. Like basically, this Raksha Bandhan festival is kind of like a celebrate in specifically in sibling. Okay, in specifically in India, sibling usually kind of like a somebody the kind of like a sister, kind of like a put the rakhi on the on the arms or on the kind of like a somebody on the wrist of brother's hand. Okay, yeah, that rakhi represent that a kind of like a somebody that sister should supposed to be care his brother and things like that. In returns, but brother should supposed to provide a protection. Okay, yeah. So this is the kind of like some promise that Raksha Bandhan has. This is the kind of like some the technique. This is the kind of like some the traditional concept regarding about the Raksha Bandhan and things like that. Now, in today's world, okay, yeah, Raksha Bandhan is kind of like a bit more different. Like since we are improving and things and that, Raksha Bandhan is kind of like a meant to be little bit of kind of like something expensive and things like that. Before, means like that, if like a 20 year ago or maybe kind of like before that, Raksha Bandhan is kind of like a just for that. Okay, yeah, like just put the rakhi and things might be kind of like somebody the brother could kind of like give the a sweet. That's it. Okay, yeah. But in today's world, in the future too, we are kind of like exchanging the gift. Okay, like a basically like we are also kind of like exchange the gift. Like a brother are kind of like a brought some sort of kind of like gift for sister, and sister also kind of like a brought some sort of gift for brother too. Okay, yeah, to kind of like somebody exchange the gift and things like that. All right, yeah. Oh, it's a kind of like something very emotional things and that. Okay, it's not really emotional by the way, but it's a kind of like a traditional our Indian concept. Now imagine a scenario. Okay, imagine scenario that ki your sister is actually coming to your home to kind of like for your rakhi and things like that. Now she kind of like only brought some sort of kind of like a something clothes. Okay, now those are kind of like a very expensive clothes and things like that, and she brought for you. Now, what exactly happened that a brother should supposed to be kind of like a somebody give her gift. Okay, yeah. But the problem is that I don't really have money. Okay, like basically just say that I don't really have that much amount of money. I cannot kind of like buy her kind of like a very expensive sari and things like that. So what do I supposed to do? Should I kind of like give the kind of like somebody gift or not? My logic says that you shouldn't supposed to be give the gift, or maybe if you wanted to give the gift, then probably kind of like a give very cheap gift, or maybe kind of like a little less, or maybe kind of like a something just okay, yeah, like very not expensive, but kind of like a very little gift, not too much. Okay, yeah, this is the kind of like a logic says. Okay, yeah, that key kind of like a control your kind of like a something this control your kind of like a something emotion, and kind of like a take the realistic approach, take the realistic kind of like a decision according to the budget that you have and things like that. This is the logic says, but emotion says no. This Raksha Bandhan is actually kind of like somebody celebrate the festival between the siblings. So possibly is this thing, my emotion says this thing, no, we should supposed to be spend a kind of like a simply couple of thousand rupees for kind of like a bring some sort of kind of like a very expensive clothes and things like that. Now, which is right? A logic is right or emotion is right? Now the context is actually changed according to the who you are. Means if you are the logical person, you might gonna say you have to kind of like a buy less expensive thing that might be kind of like a go on. Okay, yeah. But if you are emotional driven person, then probably you might gonna think that ki no, Raksha Bandhan is a kind of like a festival that kind of like a assembly that we should supposed to be kind of like assembly give very expensive gift and things like that. Now this kind of like example is not really connect with you that much. Yeah, it is not really connect with you that much. So I'm gonna give you another example. Okay, because most of people might be kind of like consider this thing that he go with the logical thing, right? Yeah. Now I'm gonna give you another example that you just completely it gonna happen with you too. Okay, example. Your age is almost like a 35. You are kind of like a somebody you are earning some sort of amount of money. Okay, yeah, little bit. Okay, now you wanted to buy a car. You have a budget of, let's just say, 10 lakh rupees. Okay, yeah, you have to buy a car for 10 lakh rupees. This is the kind of like budget that you have. Now what exactly is this thing that you went to the market and want to buy a car? Now there are so many cars are actually available in 10 lakh, less than a 10 lakh, more than a 10 lakh. Okay, yeah. So which one should you buy? Obviously, the car that kind of like somebody kind of like a giving me a very best value with the money and things like that, I would gonna buy that car. The logic says this thing, right? So basically, my logic says that I shouldn't supposed to spend more than 10 lakh rupees. Because if I kind of like spend more than 10 lakh rupees, then it kind of like out of my budget and I cannot able to do this thing. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing, if I wanted to buy 10 lakh rupees of car, that means I have to buy at least 9 lakh rupees of car, because 1 lakh rupees will be gonna spend on kind of like a road tax or things and that and that. So probably I have to buy a car in 9 lakh rupees. Okay, yeah. Then all the budget will kind of like a close to kind of like a 10 lakh rupees and things like that. This is my logic says. But when I went to the market, and basically the market is kind of like showing me so many car that kind of like so good in that, like basically it's kind of like showing me that key sir, like the person who kind of like says this thing, the sir, if you have a kind of like if you are push enough little bit, like if you could kind of like spend 12 lakh rupees, okay, yeah, then you will kind of like get very valuable feature and things like that. Your car kind of like look really good and things like that. Your car kind of like look really kind of like bigger and things like that. Like basically is this thing, if you could spend 2 lakh rupees more, then you will kind of like get so many feature, you will kind of like get so many things and that and that and that. Now what would you do? Your emotion kind of like want to say no, I just have to push little bit further, na? Like I just have to push like a 12 lakh rupees to kind of like get SUV. Okay, yeah. Why do I supposed to buy a kind of like a compact car or maybe kind of like a sedan or things like that? Okay, I just have to push 2 lakh rupees. Now that's it. Then I will kind of like get this thing. So in this particular scenario, you just have to understand your logic and your emotion are kind of like completely opposite in this particular scenario. Okay, yeah. Now I'm gonna tell you is this thing that which kind of like a person you are. Okay, yeah. If you are very logical person, then your logic and emotion are associated with this thing, and you think that no, I have to be logical from my point of perspective, from my budget point of perspective. I need to buy a car in less than 10 lakh rupees. So I should supposed to buy a car in 9 lakh rupees, so that after the tax and everything, it will goes to the kind of like a 10 lakh that I could kind of like cover everything. I don't want to take a loan and things like that. But my emotion says this thing that I should supposed to buy SUV and things like that. Now it depends on, as I mentioned, it depends on perspective, who you are. You are the kind of like a particular person, you might gonna say that no, I will gonna buy a car within 9 lakh rupees and it's good, it's great, then it will be really good. But if you are a very emotional person, then you might gonna say no, I will gonna buy this kind of like a 12 lakh rupees of car. Now let me tell you one thing, most of people you are kind of like a hearing right now, you might gonna think that I will gonna choose the logical perspective, but in reality things would be changed. Let me tell you one thing why. Because when I'm saying this thing, when you are kind of like listening this thing, you are kind of like listening my thought process and things like that. But when you are in the market, you are kind of like a bombarded by a lot of numbers, design, cars, the person who kind of like influence you to kind of like a buy kind of like expensive car and things and that and that. Because when you buy a more expensive car or when you buy expensive car, then the commission get more to the kind of like assembly the things commission will get to that particular person who kind of like let you decide which car you buy and things and that and that. That's why he's kind of like pushing you to kind of like buy this car. Oh, then why do you supposed to kind of like listen to him? Do research by yourself, na, and things like that. Huh, but people are not really that smart, na. Okay, let me tell you one thing, na. If you are kind of like spending 10 lakh rupees, obviously you will gonna do research. It's not really that you will not gonna do research and things like that. But in the research, like you gonna watch a lot of YouTube videos and things and that and that. But still, is this thing you are always gonna, when you have so much amount of data regarding about that things and that, you are still get confused even more. Why is that? Because in the end it depends on money that you spend. Okay, so if you are kind of like spending money, that means you need to understand that ki I should supposed to be kind of like a somebody let go some sort of feature to kind of like a get my budget car and things like that. Example, let's just say sunroof. So basically I'm getting sunroof in 12 lakh rupees car, but right now I cannot able to kind of like a something stuff. I'm cannot able to kind of like assembly that key afford and things like that. So I have to let go that feature and things like that. Try not to find a sunroof car in 9 lakh rupees car or less than 10 rupees car. If you're gonna find a sunroof car in kind of like assembly less than 10 lakh rupees car, then probably they will not gonna kind of like that sunroof is not kind of like a feasible, not built in that way that it should supposed to be provide a kind of like a cinematic sunroof or kind of like a things like that. It's not. Okay, do not expect so many feature in less price, because if it kind of like a provide that, that's it's not really good. There is a kind of like a some sort of wrong thing is actually happened with the car manufacturing company. Might be they kind of like a somebody they are not providing that many safety, but they are kind of like a providing you kind of like a sunroof, and that is not right. Okay, yeah. So this is what it is. The logic and emotion are somewhat something kind of like a difference. It depends on who you are and what you are. Now, in the word that I'm saying is kind of like a feel really consider that ki I should suppose to focus on logical, but in reality it's not. It is not. So emotions are always kind of like a sort of blend and things like that. Like how many people you actually bought the iPhone? So many people actually bought the iPhone, even if they are not earning any single amount of money, they still they're gonna buy iPhone. Why is that? Because they are tend towards the emotion point of perspective. They don't really focus on logical. They think that ki no, like basically if I hold the iPhone, then probably people would consider me I am kind of like a rich person and things like that. So your emotion are kind of like a something lets you take a kind of like a such a risk that yeah, do you understand this thing? But let me tell you one thing. Okay, yeah, the stuff that I mentioned regarding about logic and emotion and things like that, I always kind of like a give you examples so that logic is kind of like a feel like right point or right perspective, but sometimes emotions are also right too. That logic kind of like a feels wrong too. Okay, if you're still not really understanding this thing, I'm gonna give you example. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing that key. Let's take a example. Okay, yeah. Now APJ Abdul Kalam kind of like some three started a BrahMos missile. Okay, like basically is this thing that ki APJ Abdul Kalam wanted to make a kind of like a such a missile that kind of like provide safety for India or Indian continent and things like that, because we are actually suffering from Pakistan, we are actually suffering from China and things like that, and we all have kind of like a terrorist and things like that. As also is this thing that ki India is not really like basically basically this is the kind of like era is almost like a 1971 or things like that, or 1980 probably. Okay, yeah. In India things are very not really good thing. Okay, yeah. We have kind of like a lot of problem, like hunger problem, education problem, the human rights and things and that. We have kind of like a ton of problem and things like that. As a perspective is this thing that we shouldn't supposed to be focus on kind of like a build the missiles and things like that. We should focus on education, healthcare and things like that. These are the kind of like a logical perspective regarding about the growing the kind of like something growing the economy and things like that, right? Yeah. But emotion says this thing, no, we have to build the missile. Now why is that thing? because of that, emotion are kind of like a somewhat something kind of like a take you risk, and that risk is kind of like a let you kind of like a push little bit further. Means like that, ki let's just say, instead of kind of like a building the BrahMos missile and things like that, India kind of like a spend that much amount of money on kind of like education and healthcare and things like that. It will gonna add value. Yeah, it will gonna definitely gonna add value. But what if we didn't really build the missile and things like that? Then probably is this thing that ki missile is kind of like a provide a kind of like a somebody the early advantage and things like that. APJ Abdul Kalam understand this thing that ki how much India needs those missile. Like okay, if you don't know what is really the BrahMos missile and things like that, BrahMos missile is a kind of like a somebody the sniper in the sky. Okay, yeah, means like that a particular person, like have you ever seen that a particular guy who is kind of like have a sniper who kill the enemy from almost like a 2-3 kilometer away from the target? How this particular person do that thing is because of that he has this gun which called as a sniper gun. That sniper gun kind of like a zoom in the character from very long distance and kind of like hit the target with very rapid precision and kind of like a kill that target very easily. That is called sniper and things. Same concept is actually utilized in the missile. Okay, yeah, missile is a kind of like a simply use a kind of like a simply hypersonic things and kind of there are a lot of things. Okay, yeah, there is continent ballistic, intercontinental ballistic. It's very hard to explain things like that. Okay, so this is what it is. Okay, I'm not gonna explain regarding about the missile and things like that. But India decided that no, we should supposed to be kind of like a invest in missile, because missile is kind of like a provide the safety. Yeah, education, healthcare, they are also really good for the country too. But missile is also really essential too. So that's why APJ Abdul Kalam is kind of like a something heavily invested in kind of like a missile and things like that. So that's why we have this BrahMos missile, which kind of like a provide the safety for the citizen of the India, and because of we are provided the citizen of the India, that's why we are kind of like a pushing the healthcare, education, and things more and things like that. So what exactly is this thing? The APJ Abdul Kalam has a kind of like a somebody is this thing. They kind of like a went through a kind of like emotional point of perspective that key India should supposed to be kind of like a get its own missile. The logic says this thing that key no, we have to kind of like a put the education, healthcare, and things like that. But instead of that, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam kind of like a focus on kind of like a simply let's just say emotional point of perspective. Let's build the missile and things like that. They kind of like a collaborate with the Russia and they kind of like a build the missile called BrahMos right now. So this is what it is. Like a basically this thing. Sometimes logic is kind of like a somebody kind of like a tell you in kind of like a constraint zone or things like that. Like a do not cross the boundary. But emotion are kind of like a lets you kind of like a cross the boundary, like a do something crazy beyond your limit and things like that. And that's the kind of like emotion are kind of like a somewhat something really great. Now let me tell you one thing, both are really essential. Okay, yeah, logic and emotions both cannot be able to survive. You can find emotion in logic too, you can find logic in emotion too. Okay, this is what really essential thing to understand this thing. Okay, yeah, is this thing na ki if you are kind of like a very logical person, then track the emotion from it too, track the emotion, things like that. If you are kind of like a somebody emotional person, track the logic from that too. It's that thing. It's not a kind of like a two different thing. It's kind of like a things that it depends on perspective, that who you are and what kind of like somebody that you are looking at the perspective, and that's the kind of like a difference in between. Whatever the question is actually about that, what if kind of like somebody emotion turn into the innovation and things like that. And this is what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that ki sometimes probably I don't know sometimes I just kind of like a go beyond the kind of like a stuff that I would say, and it's kind of like a simply completely away from the question. The question says that what if the emotion fuel with the innovation and things like that. Yeah, some innovation are kind of like happen is because of the kind of like some emotion. Okay, yeah, like basically is this thing that the phone that you are kind of like holding is because of the emotion. Yeah, because we wanted to talk to the person who is kind of like a far away and things like that really required a kind of like emotion, and that emotion are kind of like a let us kind of like somebody do some sort of creativity and things, and that's why we are holding this phone and things like that. But logic is also really essential too. A logic is kind of like a try how it has a kind of like a somebody logic that if we wanted to build a kind of like a mobile phone which is kind of like a people could talk almost like 100 kilometers away, then probably we would find the logic in that thing. Okay, yeah, and that's why we could kind of like build a telephone or mobile and things and that. Okay, so example is this thing that emotion fuel innovation? I think yes, because emotion are kind of like a let us do, kind of like a uh, let us kind of like a put ourselves into out of the boundary and things like that. It kind of like a tell us that ki we should supposed to be kind of like a somebody exceed our boundary, or kind of like a look from different point of perspective or things like that. Emotion are kind of like always think from emotion point of perspective. Okay, yeah, but logic is kind of like a bit more constant and things like that, but both are really essential. Like it's not really that ki no one kind of like a somebody live without it. Emotion, sometimes emotion decision are kind of like a really good, sometimes logic decision also really good too. It's depends on the perspective that who you are and what is actually your perspective regarding about that, and that is thing. All right, this is it. I should supposed to be end here, and thank you.